So this is our Bible study for June, July and August throughout the summer 2025, when we are taking a longer look at the book of Exodus. We will work our way through the first 20 chapters of the book of Exodus, having chance to reflect on the stories and tales that tells. I've chosen Exodus because I think it is a lovely book of stories. There's a wonderful narrative, a compelling storytelling way of transmitting the text to us. So it should be fun reading, interesting reading, accessible reading. But the stories that it tells are fundamental to our Christian identity. They're fundamental to the Jewish people and to their understanding of how their community and their religion and their culture works. But we have inherited that, and many of the themes and ideas that it contains are found and fulfilled, we would say, in Jesus Christ. And so it's a really important story to understand. We've just come through Lent, Holy Week and Easter, and many of the stories are retold there, particularly the Passover and the crossing of the Red Sea. But we'll also work our way through to the giving of the Ten Commandments. So there are some really foundational and fundamental aspects of the book of Exodus, which I think it is important for us to understand and appreciate. So whether this is the first time that you've joined us for our Bible study here in Haverhill and Withersfield, or if you are a seasoned studier and are coming back for the next in our series, then welcome. Thank you for being with me, with us, as we work our way through this text, and I hope that you find it a good way to deepen your faith and understand more about what God wants for you and for all his people. And I use that phrase very particularly, God's people. I use that phrase quite a lot to talk about Christians in general. But actually in the book of Exodus, I think we really understand what we mean. It's the first time that we get that phrase used, God's people. The Hebrew word is am, as opposed to anything else, God's family, God's inheritance, God's nation, God's congregation. We get those words used, and the book of Exodus, is the first time we get God's people, and that will be important for this text and for texts later on in the Bible. We'll be looking at the book of Exodus at least for the next 3 months. That means there's 9 weeks, 9 sessions, and the text, I have split it up in a slightly difficult and idiosyncratic way. You'll see that as these videos are released, but hopefully it divides the text up nicely into thematic sections, even if they don't necessarily align with the chapter ends. So a quick note, if you see 2.10, that just refers to chapter 2, verse 10. So if you're reading this first section, we'll go up to chapter 2, verse 10, and the way that that's printed or referenced is 2.10, and that's how we refer to the Bible, chapter and verse, so that we can find our way through the text. So I have split it up. We begin with Moses' birth, then his call to ministry, his commission. Then in July we look at the heart of the text, the 5 plagues to begin with, and the next 5 plagues, and then the resolution of the 10th plague, which is the Passover. And then in August we look at some ways in which God then relates to his people after the Passover, in the crossing of the Red Sea, signs in the wilderness, and the giving of the Ten Commandments. So that's how we'll work our way through the text through the next 3 months. Once we get to the end of August, we'll have a look and decide where we want to go from there. But as we'll see, that forms a lovely wider, longer section of text that we can really get into and understand. What is this text about? I think this text is about power. And as we look around the world today, I think it's important that we recognise that we're talking about power and how leaders use and abuse power. The book of Exodus, I don't think, is as simple as there's good power or bad power. And in particular, the characters of the book of Exodus, particularly Moses, the central character, he has his weak moments, he has his bad moments, he makes some bad decisions, and we'll see that. Likewise, the pharaohs, which we might stereotype into the enemy, into the villain of the piece. I don't think that's necessarily true. There are multiple pharaohs, kings of Egypt. We know that they're not necessarily bad. If you were to read the Bible from start to finish, you would have read the book of Genesis before the book of Exodus, and there we see Joseph work with the Pharaoh to further God's purposes. So we can't say that the king of Egypt is necessarily bad either. There are some things the Pharaoh does that are good, that do help to prosper God's ways and to help us understand more about God's relationship with us. So it's not just about good power or bad power, good people, bad people, but it is about the good and bad use and abuse of power. And that includes miraculous power. We see God being held to account and establishing good relationships and good accountability within his power as well. And that's important too, because the relationship God has with his people is built on this idea of covenant. That has been revealed to us right through the book of Genesis, when God has made covenants with Noah. We looked at that, with Abraham, with others too. Covenant is it's a legal word. It just means a free association of people. So nobody is requiring anything from one side or the other, but it is a freely entered into relationship, agreement of common working. And that's important. That's how God treats his people. That's how his people treat God. That we enter into that freely and willingly, and that is the foundation for our Christian faith. But in the book of Exodus, we see in particular what that is going to mean for a people who are oppressed, for a people who have been forgotten, for a people who have been enslaved, and for a people who still live in a suffering world. So God will enter into deliverance and freedom and redemption in different ways. But we see how that requires our participation, and it requires us to enter into that covenant, that free relationship with God for ourselves. At the heart then, this is, what is it to be a person? What is it to be a people of God? For me, I think the answer is, to be a people of God is to use the freedom that God has given us to choose to do good. To us, to God, to one another. And that is what the heart of the book of Exodus is. That is at the heart of the Jewish faith, and that is at the heart of the Christian faith. Because God has placed into our hearts that desire to do good, but also the freedom to choose to do it. And that is the paradox, that is the tension at the heart of our human existence. But it is one that we explore in the book of Exodus. So if we turn to the text, chapter 1 begins with this link back to the book of Genesis, back to Jacob and his children, in particular to Joseph, who worked with the pharaohs, and Joseph, who introduced ideas of labour and economic policy. It was Joseph who told the Pharaoh to gather in the grain through the 7 years of plenty so that he could dish it out during the 7 years of famine. So as I said before, the Pharaoh is not necessarily evil. Economic policy or labour is not necessarily evil. Those things have been introduced already. But it's how we use or abuse them that are good or bad. And that's what we're going to see. In fact, the Israelites, 1:7, are fruitful in the land of Egypt. It's a good place for them. They multiply and grow exceeding strong. That's exactly what God promised to us, committed us to, right back in chapter 1 of the book of Genesis. This is what he told us as a people. Our mission is to be fruitful, to multiply, to allow life to flourish. And that has happened in the book of in the land of Egypt, but things are going to change now. Verse 1:8, a new king, a new Pharaoh arose over Egypt, who did not know Joseph, and he looked around the people and he was afraid. And constantly the challenge in the book of Exodus to doing the right thing is fear. Fear constantly in this book leads to oppression, leads to abuse, leads to sinfulness, leads to turning away from God. And we see that right at the start. Look at the midwives whom Pharaoh tasks with killing the firstborn of the Egyptians. He's told them to do this dreadful act, but they fear God more than they fear Pharaoh. And so that leads them to saving the Hebrew children. Surely that's a good thing, we would say, and God certainly uses it for good purposes. But by the end of chapter 1, we realise that actually has led Pharaoh to fear more, and Pharaoh to react with even more extremist policy. So in the middle of chapter 1, he's he's told the midwives to kill the firstborn children of the Hebrews, of the Israelites. By the end, by chapter 1 verse 22, he's commanding all his people, every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile, but you shall let every girl live. And if you are reading the NRSV, it will say every boy born to the Hebrews, and then tell you there is a note that says the Hebrew text actually says doesn't have the word Hebrews in there. The early Greek translations did, but if we assume that the Hebrew is earlier and then the Greek and Syriac and other translations come later, then it looks very much like the earliest form of the text literally says, Pharaoh, every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile. He's commanding all his people this. He's acting out of fear, and therefore introducing policy that is harmful to himself, to his own people. What's that going to do to his to the demographics of Egypt, to his pool of labour, if he no longer has male children being born either to Egyptians or to Hebrews? This is harmful to himself and to his people. Fear leads to oppression, leads to abuse. On the other hand, then, we have Yocheved, who is Moses' mother. She's not named as Yocheved until the genealogy of Exodus 6, 14 and following, but that is her name. She's praised in the letter to the Hebrews in the New Testament, in chapter 11, for not fearing Pharaoh and acting by faith. So interestingly, the letter to the Hebrews in the New Testament makes that explicit, that Yocheved should be praised because she did not fear Pharaoh, and makes that link between fear and doing the right thing, or casting out fear and doing the right thing. And that is what the author of the letter to the Hebrews calls faith. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. That's Hebrews 11:1. We still need Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, but we have that capacity to act out of faith, not fear. The opposite of faith is fear. So that is what Jochebed does. She, instead of fearing Pharaoh, she works to protect her son and places him into the river. Interestingly, therefore fulfills Pharaoh's command. What was Pharaoh's command was actually to throw the babies into the water, into the river. And that's what she does, but with some protection, with some hope that he would survive. And his sister stands at a distance, stands on the riverbank, this is 2:4, to see what would happen to him. And that's a wonderful little phrase, that she's just standing there, not taking an active part in what's going on, but she's there because she's expectant and she's hopeful and because she cares about Moses. And I think that says a lot about our ministry, actually. Someone recently to me called it persistent presence. That's what our ministry is. To be there because we're interested, because we care, and because we're hopeful. And therefore we're ready to act when something happens, not just responsively, but because we've already recognised that God might be at work in this place. And indeed, that's what happens to 5 or to 6. The daughter of Pharaoh comes down, she sees the child, she hears the child, and she takes him in. She knows it's a Hebrew child, she knows what she's doing, and she has witnesses to what she's doing. So I don't think the text can make it any clearer that Pharaoh's daughter knows exactly what she's doing. So she too acts without fear. She too acts out of faith. She too does the right thing in caring for this Hebrew child. And perhaps there's a connection here. She hears the baby crying. She has that raw, human, emotional connection to the baby. And that will be so important for the book of Exodus. That these relationships are built on our human, emotional connections. Our emotions are not necessarily bad if we direct them to the right thing. Our desire is good if we desire to do good. And we see that in Jesus. He acts out of pity. Look at Mark's Gospel, chapter 6, the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus has compassion on the crowd because they're tired and they're hungry. Jesus acts out of that human connection sometimes too, and that's what Pharaoh's daughter does here. Notice that childbearing was Abraham's promise. It was the Israelites' blessing back at the start of the book of Exodus, and it was the midwives' reward at the end of chapter 1. Puah and Shifra, they were rewarded with families for their good conduct. So childbearing was the gift of God. But it's now Jochebed's labour. Moses is given back to his own mother, but it's no longer a gift, it's no longer a blessing, it's a labour, and it's done out of command and out of a certain amount of fear and trepidation for what might happen if they find out what has happened. So Jochebed, Pharaoh's daughter, they have this understanding. Miriam knows what's happened. Pharaoh's daughter's attendants knows what happened. But beyond that, they don't. And so the child grows up. Moses grows up within this strange household. And notice that in verse 2:9, the woman nursed it. The woman is Moses' own mother, and it is the child, but they're completely depersonalized because of what's happened, because of the policy of the Pharaoh to dehumanize, to abuse, to victimize the children of the Hebrews in this way. So Moses grows up. He's in this household where he has both Egyptian and Hebrew heritage and is allowed to know it and to understand the cultures in which he's been brought up. But in very much in a vacuum, very much not experiencing them firsthand, but these two competing lineages, Egyptian and Hebrew are sort of taught to him as objects. They're not lived experience yet, and that will become important in the rest of chapter 2. So he's given this name. He's given this name Moses, which is a common name amongst Jews. It's become a name, the name of a prophet, the name of a great leader, a name of great honour. But it's a name which has that sort of unknown heritage, a little bit Egyptian, a little bit Hebrew, but without really having affinity to either. But it means drawn out of the water, but perhaps drawn out of its cultural context as well. But that allows God to take Moses, for Moses to be the one whom God can form, whom God can call, whom God can commission to be the person, the leader that he needs him to be. So thank you for joining me for this Bible study in the book of Exodus. I do hope that you find it helpful and that it helps you to understand God's relationship with you as a person and with the whole people of God in whatever way you connect with the wider church. So do use the comments on this video or speak to me in person or by email and let's find out what this text means for you and how God is speaking to you through the wonderful stories of his people of the book of Exodus. Thank you and God bless.